Artemisia the First was one of the most discussed Archer commanders when I first started making Archer content, and today I'm going to be looking at her going into 2025. Is she still a good commander? And I'll be updating my Artemisia in-depth guide. I'll go over her skills, her pairings, her talents, and if you should even consider investing in her. So if you have Artemisia, if you want Artemisia, or you want to know a little trick to get a bit of free value out of Artemisia, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now, starting off, let's go over Artemisia's active skill. Going over all of her skills, starting with the active skill, and it's a bit of a weird skill. Rage requirement 1000, and the way it works is, this commander's troop deals direct damage to itself. Damage factor 300. Now, that start is a crazy start to any active skill. I think she's the only commander in the game to damage herself, and it's kind of because when she first released, it was ridiculously overpowered. Now, nowadays, this damage factor, it's not too crazy. 300 isn't a ridiculous amount. Then again, it is damage you are dealing to yourself, so it is going to hurt, but it's not as bad as it initially was. The other thing to note is she's also then going to deal direct damage to up to 3 enemy troops in a phantom-shaped area. Damage factor 1800. Now, not a crazy active skill, not a bad active skill by any means. It's around a below average AoE nowadays. There are a lot more commanders with better AoE. Herman Prime, for example, his active skill has got a poison debuff with much better AoE. Zhu Lang has much better AoE. Liu Che, Joan Prime, Ragnar Prime, all those commanders have got stronger AoE. That being said, it's an okay amount of AoE. The damage amount is still good. The active skill, of course, though, is lacking in the fact that she's literally damaging herself, and there is really no big debuff on it. So it's an average active skill, maybe a bit below average or a lot below average. Then again, the damage, though, is still going to be relatively nice in the current meta. It's not bad. It's not like it's really behind damage. It's not like William, for example. It is an okay amount of damage that she's dealing. Moving on to Artemisia's second skill, this commander's archer units gain 20% defense and 20% health. Now, this is a really, really good skill, even in the current meta. The fact that she's getting that many stats of defensive archer stats is good. Health and defense, generally more of the rare archer stats. Only 2 of the recent commander releases have defense. It's Boudica and Herman Prime, and only Shajar and Zhu Lang have some amount of real health in their kit. I'm excluding Ashurbanipal because his expertise isn't a reliable way to get those stats. It's more of just you get them from using his active skills, and you can't choose which ones it is. So generally, archers don't get much health, or they don't get much defense. Artemisia does have both, and she's one of the rare archer commanders who does get both of those stats. So it is a good thing to have. In my opinion, this is where you can get some free value out of her. Artemisia, older commander, really easy to get her sculptures in stuff such as the daily special offer if you want to spend money there. Don't know if she's going to be the most meta there. We'll talk about that very soon, but she is available in the daily special offer, so you can get access to some sculptures through that. And she's also available in the legendary tavern, and that means you can get Artemisia, you can get her second skill maxed, and even if you don't want to run her and you get a KVK where you can mix and match skills such as Siege of Orleans, you can take off some of her skills and put them onto another commander. I've also seen her second skill available before in a Heroic Anthem KVK. So when you're able to swap skills, her second skill is really good even in the current meta. So if you want to take a skill off any archer commander, take one off Artemisia, it is going to give you a lot of value. So Artemisia's second skill, good value in my opinion if you can get access to it. And you can get it to level 5, you can put it on any archer march in pretty much any skill swapping KVK, and it's going to be one of the most overpowered skills that you can take off another commander. The only one that might rival it is maybe Edward of Woodstock's 30% health and 30% march speed, because that is a ridiculous amount of stats. But Artemisia's 20% defense and 20% health is arguably a little bit weaker, but still an amazing skill to have access to. Moving on to Artemisia's third skill, if she's serving as a garrison, she's going to take 10% less normal damage, and whenever she launches a basic attack, she's going to have a 10% chance to disarm the target for 1 second, cooldown of 5 seconds. Really meh. The stats are too low for this to really be a meta skill right now. 10% less normal damage, it's not bad in the smite meta, but there's definitely much, much stronger garrisons out there. Even in the archer garrison scene, there are a lot more stronger garrisons, with Ditto and Chiyoyung being a good example of better garrisons than Artemisia. So third skill, you're not going to see much use out of it. I'll talk about her garrison capabilities a bit later, but it's nothing too crazy. Moving on to Artemisia's fourth skill, whenever this commander's troop reaches 80% rage, it has a 50% chance to silence itself for 3 seconds, which again, really weird that she's inflicting damage and debuffs upon herself, but the good thing is she's going to give herself a 50% all damage bonus for 5 seconds. Now, that is a ridiculous level of all damage bonus. It is at Julius Caesar power level of all damage bonus, and we should know that Julius Caesar became relatively good, or if not meta on the open field, because he could get a possibility of a 50% all damage bonus for a pretty much 5 second time. So Artemisia, really, really good fourth skill if you have a way to get rid of that silence. And we'll look at that when we go into her pairings with stuff like Boudica Prime. But if you can't, this skill is average at best. The fact that she's silencing herself with a very high skill damage meta currently in the game is not going to help her at all. It's just going to hurt her. But that being said, it is not a bad thing to have that self-silence with the really big damage bonus if you have the correct pairings. But then again, you can see so far, her kit is becoming really, really limited and really niche, which can be a bit of a problem. Finally, looking at Artemisia's expertise, whenever she launches a basic attack, 10% chance to deal additional damage, 400, to the target she's hitting every second for 3 seconds. So she's going to have additional damage factor, maximum 1,200, that is nice. It is a relatively good amount of stats, to be honest, or a good amount of single target damage to have in conjunction with her active skill. Not to mention, it is just a instant trigger. So again, that is nice to have on the open field. But you should note that she's going to give the target a 15% bonus to the skill damage they deal for 3 seconds. Again, a little bit weird to be buffing your opponents, but this isn't as bad as it used to be, because when she was around 2 years ago, there was no Leo Chair in the game, and this 15% skill damage bonus could mean that she took a lot of damage. But nowadays, if you hit someone like a Leo Chair, that skill damage bonus doesn't affect them at all, and you're going to get away pretty much with just dealing 1,200 extra damage factor to your opponents for free. The last real big thing I look at with Artemisia's kit is her relic, Jar of something. I'm not gonna try to say the last bit. She's gonna get 5% archer attack, 10% skill damage reduction. Nothing too crazy. The skill damage reduction is nice on the open field, especially if you're tanking a lot of AoE. The archer attack is completely useless. So it's like a mid relic. It's definitely nothing to rave about. I mean, if you have Artemisia, I guess I'd get the relic. Otherwise, it's probably just like a skip thing. It's not powerful like Minamoto or Mehmed's relic, where you get the relic and it makes them like a really, really good commander. It's nowhere near their power level. There's so many more stats in some other relics that would make a lot more sense to buy compared to the Artemisia relic, which is pretty much average at the best. So Artemisia's relic is nothing too crazy, and in my opinion, is pretty much a skip for the commander. So overall with Artemisia's kit, what do I think her optimal skill level will be? And to be honest, I don't think you could use her under expertise nowadays. She's a really, really old commander. If you're going to run her, you pretty much want her expertise. If you really, really were able to, let's say you really want to run her and you don't want to get her expertise, I guess you skip the third skill because it is a garrison skill and you're probably going to use her on the open field. So Artemisia open field wise, you could go for a 5-5-1-5, and it is definitely doable and usable. It just won't be the most overpowered thing. If you're going to run her nowadays, I would go for the expertise just because she's going to be too weak otherwise, because a lot of her skills are a little bit outdated, or some of them a lot bit outdated compared to some of the more meta and newer commanders. I'd also say if you're going to run her, you want to get that relic 100%, because without it, you're missing a good chunk of stats for her kit compared to a lot of modern commanders. It's nothing too crazy, the amount of stats that you're missing, but it is big enough for me to say that you should get those stats. So if you want to use Artemisia, I would get her stats. It would make more sense to get the relic. If you don't, then I mean, you can probably skip the relic. If you just want to use her for some free value, get the second skill to 5, and then after that, nothing matters. Don't get her relic, don't expertise her, don't max her other skills. Just get a 1-5-5-1, so a 1-5-1-1 commander, and you're perfectly fine, because her other two skills I haven't really seen show up in the Siege of Orleans KVK, and the active skill can't. So generally, just getting that second skill max for most players is going to give you a little bit of free value. Now, in terms of Artemisia's best pairings, this is where it's going to get really, really niche for her. Her skill kit is really, really specific, and that means she's going to have really weird pairings. And the only real okay pairing nowadays that you could even really consider using is Boudica Prime. The main reason you want Boudica, A, she's a single target commander with a very big skill damage bonus or skill damage debuff she's putting on your opponent, making them take 35% more skill damage. And B, she's got a bit of march speed. Those two things really help her, but the main thing, Boudica can shrug off control effects. Control effects include silence, disarm, and also heal immune, which means she's able to remove Artemisia's self-silence effect, which pretty much means she can get a 50% all damage bonus out of that fourth skill. Now, it is an 80% chance. Generally, though, Boudica is going to shrug the silence off, and you are going to get that a 50% all damage bonus for free. So Boudica Prime is probably the only real meta-ish pairing that you could use Artemisia with. Now, is it ridiculously overpowered? Probably not, but it is the only proper pairing I can think of that you could even consider with Artemisia. Other than that, the other pairings that can be possibilities, Zhulang, but it is very slow. The only reason I recommend it is Zhulang can shrug off control effects, and when he does deal a certain amount of damage factor to your opponents, but he's only 50%, which means there's a good chance he doesn't shrug it off and you end up with the silence. And then the other option is an Amanatore, who is a full silence immune commander. But once I do an Amanatore guide update, you're going to notice she is very, very outdated. There's not much strength in her kit, and that means she's not going to work nearly as well with Artemisia. And the two big flaws of both these pairings, Amanatore and Zulang, they both don't have any March speed, which means they're going to get really, really hammered because Artemisia also has no March speed in her kit. So it's like a very, very slow moving troop that is going to be debuffing and silencing itself quite often. The only time that can't be an issue is Amanatore and Boudica Prime, who will be able to shrug up the silence. But Zulang, a lot of the time, he is going to end up silenced because it is under something like an 80 or 90%. So Zulang, definitely not the best pairing. Possibility, sure. Best pairing, definitely no. Same thing with Amanatore, she is just kind of too weak. Boudica Prime, though, is still an okay-ish pairing that you can consider running. In terms of the talents for Artemisia, generally you want her to be a secondary commander, but I do have some talent trees here, or at least one talent tree that in my opinion is probably her best talent tree. This is the tree I'd recommend for Artemisia. The defense tree is not very good generally. The archer tree is decent, and I mean, if there was more stats in it, I'd put even more stats in it. But I would just go fully into the archer tree, max it out completely, and then just go down to Tetsudo formation and grab your last couple of points into no weakness and the last two into spiked armor. So your tree would pretty much look identical to this. There's not much better you can get than this in my opinion. It is just one of the best trees you're going to get with Artemisia. Generally though, in almost every single situation, I would run her as a secondary. I don't see why she would be a good primary commander. So even with commanders like Boudica, she needs to be the secondary. Zulang, I'd still make her the secondary because he has more DPS on the initial active skill. There just isn't really a reason to run Artemisia primary, especially with her much weaker talents. One thing I think we should note about Artemisia, because her expertise is dealing additional damage, if you're running her as a secondary to a commander with the skill tree, I would go and get Latent Power. Latent Power does boost additional damage, which means Artemisia's expertise is going to deal a good amount of extra damage. I think it's going to be a total of 6% if you do end up maxing Latent Power. So in my opinion, it is definitely worth doing if you are willing to grab those extra stats. In total, 6% more additional damage on that expertise skill is nice, and in my opinion, worth those 3 talent points. So I do it if I have Artemisia expertise, if I am running her with a skill tree commander, like Boudica Prime. Now, the last thing to really talk about today is Artemisia a good investment? Do I think she's going to be a good investment in 2025? Yeah, nah. Artemisia is a very outdated commander nowadays. She isn't meta stats, she is not meta damage, she's not meta pairings, and the worst thing about her, she is super, super niche. Compared to a commander like Nebu, who in my opinion is a better investment now, she is a horrible choice because she has such a specific kit. She needs a commander who will be able to shrug off silence. She needs a commander who won't get too affected by a skill damage reduction. She needs a commander who's not super weak, because otherwise the damage she's going to deal to herself is going to be very impactful. So she needs a lot of these really specific niche type of commanders, which means it's very hard to find a pairing for her. Now, Artemisia's stats and her damage and all that, it's actually still not that bad in the current meta. It's just that Boudica is nowhere near as strong as she used to be, which means Artemisia, her best pairing, or at least Artemisia's best pairing being Boudica, cannot work together as well as it used to. Back when Boudica first released, Boudica absolutely meta. Artemisia would work very well with her. The same could be said about YSG with Boudica though. So nowadays, I don't see why you'd even consider running an Artemisia on the open field at all. If you don't have her, I wouldn't max her, and if you do have her, I'd only be using her for a little time while I work towards getting newer commanders, whether it be new cavs, infantry, even new archers by the next cycle. By then, I think Artemisia will be pretty much a dead commander, unless she gets a massive new relic or a commander that fits her kit perfectly. Now, I highly doubt that's going to happen. Highly doubt she's going to be meta in 2025. So overall, I'm going to say she is a poor open field investment. In terms of garrison, even though we didn't speak about her garrisoning much, she's absolutely abysmal because she doesn't really have a good garrison pairing. Her only option is really Amanatore, and Amanatore's garrisoning capabilities, especially in 2024, basically 2025, completely useless. Amanatore doesn't even work with some of the new meta garrisons like Ditto and Jioyong, and I say Ditto is new, and she came out when I first started making videos, and she isn't even good with Amanatore. So Amanatore has no hope as a garrison with Artemisia, and in my opinion, I just wouldn't invest in her as a garrison commander. It would make 0 sense. So Artemisia, open field and garrison-wise, not a good investment, and in my opinion, definitely a skip commander for pretty much the end of time unless something really big changes. Now, if you enjoyed today's video or you found some of the archer guides a little bit interesting, you probably do want to join my Discord server. My Discord is one of the best places to go to get yourself a bit of Archer advice, get yourself a bit of Archer information about some of the newer commanders in the game, or even ask older questions about commanders like Artemisia. I try to be quite active on the server. Whenever I see someone has pinged me, I generally will go and respond to it as soon as I can. So if you want to join the server, if you want to ping me to ask me questions, if you want to ask other people questions, it is a really, really good place to do it. Discord link will be in the pinned comment and also in the description. I highly recommend it. If you don't like it, you can always leave. And other than that, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.